So let's moving towards our third series of or the third session of the Supreme Court. We need to understand whatever we have done with the first two videos, we have to go through them really thoroughly, and then only watch this third series of the Supreme Court. So there is a fourth important jurisdiction and power of the Supreme Court is known as the advisory jurisdiction, or it is also known as the consultative jurisdiction, which is mentioned into the Article 143. Now this article is really important. You need to go into depth through the book. Now what does that advisory jurisdiction says that? Now President can seek jurisdiction from the Supreme Court in two important matters. If there is a public matter which is regarding to the public importance or public matter, the issue which is related to the public matter, and second is the issue arise by the pre-constitutional treaty. Now in the perspective, in the first matter, the public matter, the decision to tender by the Supreme Court is not binding, or it is not necessarily that Supreme Court give its opinion to the President. It is his own power of the Supreme Court not to even give his opinion. In the second case, which is the pre-constitutional issues or the treaty issues, here Supreme Court have to give its opinion to the President. But remember, with this both the matters, decision given by Supreme Court is not at all binding on the President. You need to remember that. This is not binding on the Supreme Court. Moving towards the fifth power of the Supreme Court is the court of record. This is mentioned in the Article 129 of our Constitution. So what is this court of record? Remember that the record that is made by the Supreme Court, whatever the verdict they have given, whatever the cases that is handled by the Supreme Court, the decision they have given cannot be questioned in any of the subordinate court, not in the High Court, not into the any district court, or maybe furthermore courts. Remember that there is no issue to ask or re-question the Supreme Court regarding their own verdict. And second is that power to punish if somebody do the contempt of court. Now what is contempt of court? It simply means not to obeying or not to following the verdict or the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. There are two matters. One is a criminal matter and another is a civil matters. So the civil matter in simply means that if somebody will fully disobey the opinion of the Supreme Court, then under the civil matters they can be the charge can be filed against them. And under the criminal matter, if somebody interfere into the proceeding of the Supreme Court or obstruct the administration of the Supreme Court, then the Supreme Court can condemn that person. Remember, this is very important article under Article 129 regarding the court of record. Now moving further, sixth power of the Supreme Court is that power of judicial review. Now this question has already asked in UPSC 2018 exams. So power of judicial review. What is a judicial review? In Article 13, if you go back to our fundamental rights, you will understand indirectly Article 13 itself mention about the judicial review. The phrase of judicial review is not mentioned in the Constitution, but this is one and the same Article 13 itself describe it. So what is judicial review? Remember that when Supreme Court feels that the constitutionality or there is a violation of Constitution done by the legislative enactment or executive order of the executives, then it may be known as the violation of the constitutional. Maybe they will violate the fundamental right or any other important rights or the any fundamental human rights. Then Supreme Court have right to go through their act, go through their policies and look that there is a violation of our fundamental rights or violation of the Constitution. On the basis of that, Supreme Court has the right to look for this verdict and do the judicial review. Now remember that America also have the judicial review, but here we need to remember the India's judicial review is little narrower than the USA judicial review. There are two important factors or phrase you need to understand is that due process of law and procedure established by law. So Indian Constitution, Indian Supreme Court follows the procedure established by law, and America's Supreme Court follows the due procedure of law. So why these phrases sounds little cliche? You need to understand that due process of law, it means that whatever law, if there is a violation of the Constitution, if violation of the law itself plus the procedure itself, there can be some lacunas, or the law itself is against the Constitution, and then after the law framed, that law also is non-constitutional. Understand it. The procedure and another is the law itself. Both can go wrong. But in India, sometimes we just look for the law and we does not look for the procedure. Sometimes it may happen the procedure itself has some lacuna or procedure itself is not following the constitutionality. It may be possible. But in USA, both of this procedure are looked in a little more sensitive manner than the Indian Supreme Court. That's why our judicial review become little narrower than the Supreme Court of the USA. I think so. If you does not understand this topic, I will definitely take it into our classes. But remember that Indian government, Indian Supreme Court has a procedure established by law, and USA has a due process of law. This is all about the judicial review. Please remember Article 13. So it is also known as that India is a beautiful synthesis of Parliament of the British and the Supreme Court of the or the judiciary of the USA. So we taken both the important things and added to our constitution. So some or other ways, some good things and bad things also come in our constitution. Moving further, this was all about the power of judicial review. Moving towards the seventh, other powers. So this is also important. Sometimes UPSC asks some direct question and picked up from the book itself. So first power is that election process of the president and vice president. If this is void or make it like if there is a violation, then whatever decision is given by Supreme Court is a binding on both the offices. Remember that election of the president and vice president. On the same line, if there is a UPSC's president has some violation, then also, and if they find out the guilty, then Supreme Court decision is also binding on the UPSC chairman or president. Moving further, there is also important article is Article 137, which talks about the judicial to review its own judgment or the self-correctiveness of the Supreme Court. It means whatever decision may Supreme Court have given in his past jurisdiction or the verdict, he can change that into the future jurisdiction. And it is not even Supreme Court is a final authority, but there is no another authority we can pass on to say that the previous jurisdiction of the Supreme Court and today's jurisdiction has some differences. So under Article 137, the Supreme Court get the protection. So even we have some beautiful cases that even we can remember Golaknath case under 1967 has changed. The Supreme Court itself changed its verdict into the Keshavan and the Bharti case in 1976, I guess, and then whatever decision that given by Keshavan in the Bharti case, Supreme Court also made some changes into their own verdict into the Minerva Mill case. So there is no permanency into the Supreme Court jurisdiction because it is the final authority to decide their own jurisdiction. So under Article 137, it is important. Again, there is important power of the Supreme Court is that if Supreme Court feels to withdraw some pending cases which are there into the High Court, he can do it by self without even asking to High Court. Or maybe he can transfer some cases from one High Court to another High Court. This is also power of the Supreme Court. Another important power is Article 141. Please remember this Article 141 because Article 141 says that the decision that is given by Supreme Court is binding on the High Court and all the subordinate or the respective courts. Nobody can challenge the verdict is given by the Supreme Court. Please remember this under Article 141. There is also a need to remember that Supreme Court is the ultimate interpreter of the Constitution. I hope you understood whatever I have taught you today. Please go through all the three important series of our Supreme Court. What we have seen just recent in this third series of lecture is that there is important power of the Supreme Court. Before that also we seen, but this is important power. The fourth power is the advisory jurisdiction, which is also known as a consultative jurisdiction under Article 143. Then fifth power, we have seen that court of record under Article 129 of the Supreme Court, and we also seen that power of judicial review under Article 13, but judicial review phrase has not mentioned. Judicial review of this Indian Supreme Court is narrower than the American Supreme Court because of we follow the procedure established by law, and US Supreme Court follows the due process of law. We also said that Indian Supreme Court or Indian Constitution is a beautiful synthesis of the judiciary of the America and the parliamentary system of the British. We also seen that other important power of the Supreme Court. One of them is a removal of the president and vice president, which is a binding and has a final authority to say. Also, if there is a UPSC chairman is a guilty by his own office, then also whatever decision is given by Supreme Court is binding on the UPSC. We also seen the record of like a self-corrective record or the court of record power of the Supreme Court under Article 137. He can himself challenge his own decision and can change his verdict into the next decision. Please remember that. Again, we seen that Supreme Court by himself can remove or withdraw the pending cases